So in this video, I'm going to explain how antibiotic resistance develops in bacteria. So before we begin, it's important to keep in mind that antibiotics, their sole purpose is to kill bacteria. Therefore, if you have a viral infection and the cause of your disease is viral, antibiotics won't kill viruses. So it's important to keep that in mind. And in future videos, we'll get into how exactly the antibiotics work, but most of the antibiotics work by essentially acting on the ribosomes or transcription or translation in bacteria because that's different than humans. And so now let's go and talk about what exactly antibiotic resistance is. So essentially, antibiotic resistance is when a type of bacteria develop a resistance to a certain type of antibiotic that killed it before. So let's say, for example, we have E. coli as a bacteria, and then we give it an antibiotic that normally kills E. coli. So let's say we treat this E. coli infection with penicillin, which is supposed to kill the E. coli. So now let's talk about what exactly can happen for bacteria to be able to survive. And so it's kind of shown right here in this diagram, but essentially antibiotic resistance is a natural phenomenon. So it's pretty similar to natural selection. And so as you can see in this diagram, you have lots and lots of E. coli, but they're not all exactly the same. Some are going to have a little bit different genetic information due to spontaneous mutations, for example. So in this diagram, these little purple bean looking bacteria things are the ones that are resistant to the penicillin. So let's say they're all E. coli. And so these two are resistant to penicillin. Now the rest in this grayish blue color are not. So as a result, the antibiotics will kill the bacteria. However, as you can see right here in step 2, not all of the bacteria die. So these two purple ones are resistant to antibiotics. And so as a result, they're not going to die. Therefore, in step 3, the next step, the bacteria can reproduce and make more of themselves. And so they're going to pass on their own genes, which are, in this case, we'll talk about E. coli. And these genes are going to be resistant to penicillin. They're going to make the E. coli resistant to penicillin. And then essentially throughout time, as you progress in time, you're going to get pretty much all of the bacteria that are resistant to penicillin. And so there are two ways bacteria can acquire antibiotic resistance. The first one is by just a spontaneous mutation. So there are mutations that occur all the time, and perhaps by chance, one of these E. coli bacteria gets a spontaneous mutation that makes it resistant to the penicillin. Now, another cool way that bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics is they can essentially transfer the antibiotic resistant gene to other bacteria via a plasmid. And so that happens by a process called conjugation, which we talked about in previous videos. And so you may wonder now, how can we prevent this? So obviously you won't be able to prevent it all the time, but you can reduce the likelihood that a bacteria will develop antibiotic resistance. And so essentially, if you use antibiotics a lot and use it in very low doses, it's going to allow the bacteria to develop antibiotic resistance more easily. Additionally, there are many other ways to properly use antibiotics that are important, such as for people to take their antibiotics for the full dose. A common thing that occurs is people have a tuberculosis infection, and then they're given antibiotics, and then they take it until they feel better, but then there's still some tuberculosis bacteria in their body. However, they feel better and they'll stop taking the antibiotics. And this can cause antibiotic resistance. And so, as you may know, we already have antibiotic resistant tuberculosis, which is extremely dangerous. Therefore, it's really important that we take antibiotics properly, and this is done to try and reduce the amount of antibiotic resistant bacteria. So that sums it up for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video and found it useful. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. Comment down below if you have any questions or concerns, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.